Welcome to my presentation. My name is Manjeevan, and I'll be sharing with you an interesting topic today. The topic is Intelligent Fraudulent Detection System for Payment Cards. I share with you the table of contents that I will be presenting. In the first part, I'll be introducing the topic of the payment cards. In the second part, I'll be looking at the setup of what is going to be done in the experiments. In the third part, it will be on the experimental results that were conducted. And finally, on the fourth part is the summary of the entire experimental design and what are the future directions for this particular topic. Now, let's first look into the introduction. What are payment cards all about? So payment cards are basically a part of the payment system, and these cards are typically issued by financial institutions. So financial institutions are typically banks in the countries. And what does this do? So it enables you, who is holding the card, to be able to access funds that you have in, for instance, your bank account or a credit account, and lets you to spend that money that you have. And these payment cards are made up of credit, debit, and also prepaid cards. So there are three main types. And why do people like to use payment cards? It basically simplifies the shopping or many other transactions. How has the electronic payments developed over the past years? Like I mentioned in the previous slide, so the credit, debit, prepaid, and also charge card are widely available today as compared to many years ago. And these cards are one of the most common payment methods in a number of countries. And by the digital technologies rising and developing, the way we handle money has completely changed. If in the past that cash is the one that exchanges hands, today payment cards are the one that is being used widely. And as I said, that cash has been changed with plastic or payment cards. Basically, the entire monetary policy, corporate plans, and operations for both large and small medium enterprises have completely changed. Basically, the way people do business has slowly migrated from a cash-based business to a more digital business where they accept cards. With any new technology, there is always concerns, and involving payment cards, there are serious concerns. The main thing is the commercial sector, whether it is large or small medium enterprises. These sectors lose billions in dollars annually, and this is not just restricted to a single country, it's around the world. And this creates a huge financial risk and uncertainty. The American bankers projected that over 10,000 payment card transactions happen each second. So you can just imagine how many transactions happens every single day. Using such a high transaction rates, fraudsters have targeted payment cards as is an easy target and a valuable one. And fraud or fraudulent transactions is a serious threat in most commercial and business fields. So payment cards, since the time it has been released, they have been fighting fraud since the 1950s. Fraud in the past wasn't as sophisticated as it is today, but there has been fraud all along. So the theft of payment card leads to losses in billions of dollars. And this is a very costly affair, especially to financial institutions who basically issue you the card. So now where can fraud happen? It can happen at the point of sales, basically when you take your plastic card and you swipe it at the cashier. It can happen online when you do online shopping, especially, or you pay for something online, over the phone when you do a telephone order, or with lost or stolen cards. Sometimes you drop your card somewhere, it gets lost, and someone uses it to make a transaction. So in 2015 alone, the loss from fraudulent occurrences in payment cards amounted to over 21 billion US dollars. And who bears most of this cost? The issuers, basically the financial institutions, bear majority of this cost at almost $16 billion. And the European Central Bank reported that 60% of these fraud instances came from the card not present transaction. Basically, card not present is basically transactions that typically happen online. And the other 23% are at the point of sales, basically at the cashier terminals. What is the motivation for fraud to happen? The fraudsters do the fraudulent transactions because there is huge monetary gains for them. And with the ever-changing nature of financial services, it gives them a wide range of opportunity for them to do fraud. And what happens with the money? So some of these funds that are part of the payment card fraud funds criminal operations such as terrorism. And that is something that needs to be stopped. And then you would ask, why aren't there anything to help stop fraud? Well, there are fraud mechanisms and bank models in order to detect. However, the having a reliable payment fraud detection is very important and is something that needs to be evolved along the time as fraudsters get smarter to detect what the financial institution is actually doing. In the literature review that was conducted, it suggested that using original or basically standard features that are provided when someone swipes their card or does an online transaction. And there are also some literature that use aggregated features, basically features that were derived from the original features. And based on the results, aggregated features help the classifiers to detect better for the fraudulent transactions. This literature, however, did not have a lot of statistical analysis done. Next, how do we actually measure how good that particular model is? Any type of model typically uses a type of metric. Okay? And the accuracy metric may not accurately reflect a classifier's capability. Okay? Especially when in fraud, you have maybe one fraudulent transaction out of a million genuine transactions. Using the accuracy rate, it could be 99.9999%, which you may think is very good. But in the matter of fact, that it did not manage to catch the fraudulent transaction, as these are highly skewed data sets. Okay? There are a number of literature that actually use the area under the curve, which is a more comprehensive performance statistics. How do we reduce false alarm? False alarm is something that when a genuine transaction is identified with the detection system as fraudulent, and this is a serious concern. Why? Because financial institutions don't want a genuine customer to have his or her transaction rejected and use a card from a different bank because it annoys customers, and once they start using from a different bank, they may not go back to their original bank. So in this work, I look at how we can reduce this false alarm rate in a fraud detection system. This is to ensure that the customer has a seamless journey when doing any purchases. We now look at the experimental setup. So in this work, a real-world payment data set is used in analyzing the capabilities of 13 different classifiers and some statistical measures, including the area under the curve, for performance assessment and comparison with other work as well. So these 13 statistical and machine learning models are used in detecting payment card fraud using public data and also real-world transaction records that were provided by a financial institution. And not only the original features are used, aggregated features are used as well for the experiments. We look now at the first type of classifier, which falls under the trees main category. So, decision trees show and classify data using the if-else criteria and is probably one of the most commonly used algorithm when explaining the results. Decision stumps are similar to decision trees, but they only divide on a single attribute. Random trees, they randomly select portion of the predictors and they split the tree node with the best one. Now, random forest is based on the decision tree. However, it uses multiple decision tree outputs. For instance, you can set 50 different decision tree outputs just to get a single outcome. So it basically blends the decision together. And then you have the gradient boosting tree. It does an ensemble of weak prediction decision. In the second part of the 13 classifiers, we look at types of neural networks. So the first one is naive Bayes. It assumes an independent input variable. The second one is artificial neural networks, which is probably the base of all types of artificial intelligence. And these are basically modeled after the animal's brain biological neural networks. Then we have deep learning. So deep learning is similar to neural network, which I just explained. However, it has 3 or more layers. So it goes deeper into the learning. And we have multi-layer perceptron. So multi-layer perceptron is a type of an artificial neural network which has many layers of perceptrons. In the final part of the 13 classifiers, there are the regression and the others. So two types of regression that is being used. The first one is linear regression. So linear regression uses a linear connection between the independent and dependent variables. Logistic regression estimate the logistic model parameters that are being set. We have the support vector machines. They are very effective when we have high dimensionality data. And the last one we use is rule induction, which extracts formal rule from a set of observations. Now, all of the experiments were evaluated using two types of data sets, as I mentioned. The first one uses a public database. The second one is a real-world payment card database from a financial institution. For all of the trials, RapidMiner Studio, as you can see the image on the bottom right, was used for all of the trials. So why RapidMiner was chosen? It basically can do the prototyping and validating of the algorithms quickly. And all of the parameters for each of the algorithm was used as default. And whenever there is any experiment, there might be the bias of each algorithm. So in order to eliminate that, a tenfold cross-validation was used across all of the algorithms. Now we look at the experiment's results. For the benchmark data, there are 3 different card data sets that we use, and all these 3 are from the UCI machine learning repository, which is publicly accessible. So there are various number of features used, from 14 all the way to 24 features. And the data sets vary in size as well, from a small 690 to a slightly larger 30,000 rows of data sets. We now look at the experimental accuracy rates for the 3 data sets that were publicly available. As you can see from the 13 classifiers, there is quite a big variety in terms of the accuracy rates, which ranges up to 16% in difference from the lowest to the best accuracy rate. For example, the decision stump. Okay? was one of the lowest accuracy rate in the first data set. Okay? In the second data set, random tree had the lowest accuracy, while for the last data set, the naive bias had the lowest accuracy. In terms of highest accuracy, the linear regression had the highest in German, while the gradient boosting tree had the highest accuracy, of up to 86% in the second data set. So as you can see, there is no one classifier that is the best or the worst across all the three different data sets. In terms of the area under the curve rates, again, it's a wide range of values all the way from 0.5 to 0.937. So AUC maxes out at 1. And if you can see again that the linear regression worked best for German dataset, while for the other two datasets, the gradient boosting tree had the best result. And these results are very similar to the accuracy rates. Now, for the real-world dataset on the payment card data, a total of 60,000 records were provided by the financial institution. And in the transaction database, if we look at dataset 1, the account number, transaction amount, date, time, all the way to transaction type were the original dataset features that were provided. Dataset 2, 3, and 4 had a bunch of aggregated features, such as the transaction amount number, basically the count, and also the sum. There's also the device type, how many devices were used, okay, the count, and also the sum. So if you can see that the dataset 2, 3, and 4 had various different sets of columns or basically information that were being used for the experiments. Now, we look at dataset 1 to 4 results. If we can see dataset 3 match very closely to dataset 2, but for dataset 4, there were some results that got better or some of them were unchanged. So we can see that naive bias did very poorly in the first dataset, especially, but for dataset 2, 3, 4 with the aggregated features, it did fairly better, but it was still the lowest performing dataset. If we look at the decision tree and also decision sum, it got the best result across all of the 4 datasets, while for dataset 1, majority of the classifiers did pretty similarly well to each other. So remember, dataset 1 was a dataset without any of the aggregated features. So with the use of aggregated features in dataset 2 to 4, the experimental accuracy did increase. So now, detecting the fraud rates is as equally or more important as the non-fraud. So if we can look at how the results are scattered, the linear regression and also the rule induction algorithm could not detect any fraud at all. Okay, but the SVM, naive bias, and some other classifiers could detect fraud in most of the data sets. So it's important to have a classifier which detects fraud as well as genuine transactions. So the genuine transactions or non-fraud detection rates were very good across most of the classifiers, with exception of naive bias for the first data set without the features being aggregated. So in order to choose a good classifier, both the fraud and non-fraud or genuine detection rate should be as high as possible. We now look at the AUC scores. Again, as with the benchmark results, it varied greatly from 0.5 all the way to almost 0.97. And decision tree, rule induction, decision sum did very poorly. However, gradient boosting tree did very well in terms of the AUC at 0.967 for all of the data sets with the aggregated feature and 0.866 for the one without the aggregated feature. So gradient boosted tree works well. So we now go on to the summary. Fraud definitely hurts the pockets of the financial institution as they are the one who is forking out the money. So online transactions has significantly increased with the rise of e-commerce, and it is the cheaper prices online that actually boost the payment card use. And every financial institution should and must have a payment card fraud detection system that works well to reduce their fraud risk, as any losses, it not only causes financial uncertainty, but is also very costly to the financial institution. The detection of fraud is important, and the study approaches to reduce the uncertainties created by the difficulties that has been addressed earlier. And with the outbreak of COVID-19 for the past few years, consumers have been moving from physical to online purchases. And when the online transactions increase, fraud increases as well. And to keep the business overhead low, it's important to reduce these fraud transactions before they occur. So it must be stopped. And getting real transactions record is not as easy because a lot of financial institutions are very reluctant to share them. So therefore, the payment card fraud detection studies have been limited. Okay? And using publicly available data may not be relevant to the real world data that is used in commercial software. So in this work, the payment card fraud detection was investigated. And one of the key contribution was the development of a practical payment card fraud detection system using real transaction records. So this method is hoped to reduce financial losses and business uncertainty not only for financial institutions but for businesses out there. So a total of 13 models were used, from artificial neural networks all the way to deep learning in the evaluation. And the 3 different publicly available data sets from the UCI repository were also reviewed. For the real-world card results, the gradient boosted tree again was the best at 0.866 with the original features, and it increased to 0.967 for the aggregated features. For random forest, for instance, from 0.5 AUC, it jumped all the way to 0.958 using aggregated features. So we can see that the use of aggregated features boosts the performance of certain classifiers. And this study's framework used a single model. As you can saw, it used one of the 13 models. And this is probably one of the shortcomings. So in future work, hybrid models or models that use multiple models will be used to verify transactions, which is hoped to actually improve the fraud detection rate. And the use of online detection approaches will also be looked at. Why? This will enable real-time and real environment payment card fraud detection and also prevention. And for financial risk, what are some of the further research that can be done? So as financial risks vary by location, there are many risk models. So the framework should be made more adaptable for multiple risk analysis methods rather than just a single one. And to guarantee that the framework can be used, is also useful to study how different measurement mistakes in other financial domains are looked at. Thank you for listening to the presentation.